Now what will it be? Death or exile?
What's up, guys? It's Christian with the Film Exiles, and this is a non-spoiler review of WandaVision, the first streaming show in a long line of planned streaming shows in the Marvel Cinematic Universe for the Disney Plus platform. So Falcon and the Winter Soldier is next, with Loki, Ironheart, and a lot more to come. Now, while this is a non-spoiler for WandaVision, I'm assuming that you're up to date on the MCU that came before it. So Avengers Endgame, Spider-Man Far From Home. Yes, it's a Sony movie, but it's set in the Marvel Universe. I will be spoiling anything that came before. So stop it here if you're not caught up on the MCU up to this point. You have been warned. Now, like my mid-season review, I'm only going to go into a few topics here. I'm going to keep it short. And like before, I'm going to break it down and answer, should you watch it? From an MCU fan standpoint, a casual fan, and then a non-MCU fan standpoint. So let's get it out there. I'm the Marvel shill of the Film Exiles, okay? I'm proud to say it. I wear it proudly. But I'm confident in saying that Lupe, Manu, the team, they would tell you that I'm not afraid to call Marvel out on some of the BS that they pull. And even though I'm an uber fan, I will do it. I take the MCU for what it is, and I enjoy it as such. So here's the basics. The show was created by Jack Schaefer, who's the writer of the upcoming Black Widow. She's the director of a sci-fi comedy movie called Timer, and she's also a co-writer of Captain Marvel. The show is clearly set in the MCU, so Kevin Feige and his team, of course, are listed as executive producers, but multiple directors take the helm of each episode. However, unlike The Mandalorian, where you could feel the minor differences in each episode's directors, this show feels like it was directed from the top down, with a narrative that it wanted to tell. So on a personal level, I didn't notice the director differences between the episodes the way I noticed that in The Mandalorian. Now let's start with the first thing that everybody sees, the actors and the performances, now that we have a full 9 episodes under our belts. The show predominantly stars Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda the Scarlet Witch, Paul Bettany as the Vision, Teyonah Parris as Monica Rambeau, Kathryn Hahn as Agnes, Randall Park as Agent Wu, Kat Dennings as Darcy Lewis, and Josh Stromberg is Director Hayward, and finally Evan Peters is Pietro Maximoff? Yeah, that's right, Quicksilver. Not going to say anything else because it'll spoil if I do, but he's listed that way in the credits. This show belongs to Elizabeth Olsen, and it's her performance as Wanda that anchors the show. I'm going to get to her in a moment, but I want to shout out the others first. Paul Bettany is great in the show. He hams it up during the moments when he's fully immersed in the sitcom world and he's lost in this fantasy or whatever the show is. He's fun to watch. But Paul shines in his moments with Olsen. Their chemistry together is so good. He's also fantastic in the moments when he realizes that there's more to this world than he originally thought. And that's when he really starts to shine. Randall Park and Kat Dennings deserve a shout out here as well. They're a lot of fun together, and it's nice to see Kat on her own without having to bounce off Chris Hemsworth or Natalie Portman, let's say, as she did in the Thor movies. Randall Park, we know, is always good, and he doesn't double down on his comedy in the show, which is really good to experience because they could have gone hard with his character and gone overboard with the comedy with him, and they didn't. Teyonah Parris, she's also good here too, and they give her moments to shine as Rambeau's daughter, as someone who truly seems to understand Wanda, and really one of the only few in this universe that really does seem to understand Wanda. She brings all she has, but they sometimes forget about her character. I'll explain that later. Kathryn Hahn, unfortunately, is a bit forgettable as Agnes, at least until the final 3 episodes, where she truly starts to stand out. The rest of the cast, of course, I think they're serviceable in their roles, but ultimately, they're a bit forgettable, I have to say. Now, Elizabeth Olsen. Man, she is so good in this series. I've always known she was a good actress. But, Marvel, they're notorious for not letting their actors flex their muscles and show their ranges. I mean, you got a couple. You got Robert Downey Jr., Chris Hemsworth, Josh Brolin got to do some things as Thanos, and, of course, the great Chadwick Boseman. He really got to show his stuff as well. But most Marvel actors, even the great ones, like Natalie Portman I mentioned before, you're really not getting an opportunity to have that person stretch out and really have that person show their range and their abilities. But in this show, Elizabeth Olsen is so on point. She just brings it from beginning to end. She can switch between funny, sad, angry, remorseful, loving. in a span of moments, and her face is so expressive. I also need to make sure I mention how great she is in episodes 8 and 9. These two episodes belong to her. Some much needed backstory between her and Vision was added to the show to kind of validate their relationship and the feelings that they have for one another. And man, she really brings the emotion in so many of these scenes. So I really have a lot of respect for Elizabeth Olsen. I did before, but I have more now. So now let's get into some of the technical stuff, the cinematography, VFX, things like that. Now, I've said from the beginning that this show needs to look as close to the level of an MCU theatrical production as possible. You're looking at about, let's say, 3 movies in the MCU kind of jammed into this 9-episode show. So yeah, it's a TV show, but people expect more now. And when you're marketing these streaming shows as part of a universe with A-list talent and that production, you better bring it. So I have to admit, aside from some little CGI glitches that you will see, the show delivers from the technical standpoint. The VFX look great, with an ability to showcase like superhuman abilities when needed, and then blend it seamlessly into the contained world that they're building here. Also, the VFX don't overpower the show, which many MCU productions have a habit. They have the habit of making the special effects more important than the story, instead of having the special effects enhance the story. There's definitely a difference. But this show lets the special effects enhance the story. The story itself is really the star here. Yeah, there's a couple of episodes that go off the deep end, but for the most part, it's really the story that's the star. Now, the cinematography, it's not stellar, since the show isn't showcasing these superhero fistfights or anything like that, but it does a good job of creating this claustrophobic feeling when people are trapped inside Wanda's quote-unquote vision, if you will. Costumes, camera angles, things like that, they pay homage to the decade that that episode is set in. So Wanda's sitcom-style fantasies are broken out into the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, and so forth. And the costumes, the design choices, the directions, the handy cam effect, if you will, they reflect that until the final couple of episodes. And whenever they're outside of the vision, let's say they're talking to somebody now in our present world, a lot of that is thrown out the window. But I did like those little homages. And the show is a prestige property and a top-tier streaming platform, like I said, and I think it shows. A lot of money went into this, and you can see that a lot of money went into this. Now, I want to talk about the tone. You know, this scared a lot of people, with so many people just thinking it would be a sitcom for 9 episodes. It's going to be a laugh fest. That's all it is. You'll have a laugh track, and I'm basically be watching Seinfeld for 9 episodes set in the Marvel Universe, and that's that. Well, it is a sitcom, and especially at the beginning, it leans heavily into sitcom tropes, and it keeps some of that throughout the entire show. This is a created, perfect world, and when inside it, it follows sitcom rules. However, in my opinion, when you hit the 4th episode, things start falling apart in that perfect little world. And by the penultimate episode, by episode 8, we're no longer even remotely concerned about the sitcom tropes anymore. We don't care about that stuff because things are kind of falling apart. Now, let's be clear. The show does not do some 180-degree turn for the MCU and suddenly go into this Logan-style storytelling, okay? It's in the MCU. It's funny, and at times it's quite breezy. However, when the show focuses on Wanda, her pain, and the family that's being created in this vision world, it's quite different than anything the MCU has up to this point. It's quirky, it's smaller in scale at times, and it's emotional. The tone does, on occasion, dip back into that superhero tone that the MCU is famous for at times. So don't expect a total detachment from the Marvel formula, but don't be scared off about what you may have read or what you may be expecting about the quote-unquote tone. Now, I've talked about a lot of good here. I got to talk about a couple flaws. The pacing in the show has been talked about ad nauseum online. People have picked the pacing apart. And while I think some of that is a product of our instant gratification culture, where we can binge watch shows anytime we want without having to wait a week for the next episode, it is a valid criticism. The pacing in the first few episodes, they're not good. They border on slow. Sometimes the cardinal sin of being boring. But the show kicks it up a lot in the 4th and 5th episodes, only to slow back down once again and then kick back in for a truly great episode 8 and 9. But this flip-flopping with the pacing is jarring, and I think it's going to take some people out of the show. I really do. Plus, most episodes are around that 35 to 38-minute mark. You can't waste time with slow stories or pacing issues when you got such little overall time to tell your story. Another issue is that the number of threads here that they're starting in the show that need some sort of ending or tying off by the final episode. If you start about 5 threads and by the ending episodes you only have time to finish off one of the threads, that's a problem. Now, I'm not going to spoil anything here, and the internet has been going crazy if you're on social media, talking nonstop about the ending and who likes what. But they do spend a little too much time in the show not focusing on Wanda and setting up these threads for Doctor Strange 2, which we heard Wanda is going to be a huge part of. So because of that, the ending probably will not be as fully satisfying for some, since certain characters get forgotten about. And all those fan theories that we had wound up getting tossed out the window. Plus, in typical MCU fashion, some of the stakes aren't that high. Now, thankfully, Wanda's stakes are high, and she's respected the entire series. But I think you might be disappointed by the lack of stakes with some of these other characters. It's a problem that the MCU continues to have, and I think it's something that's going to haunt them for the future. So now that I've watched the entire show from beginning to end, what's the bottom line here? So all fandom aside, my shilling aside, everything, my love of Marvel aside, this is a good-looking, well-produced show with prestige qualities. And it deserves a high-profile spot in a growing streaming service. It's definitely in the MCU, and just different enough to entice others to check it out. So like the last time I did this, I'm going to ask, should you watch it if you're an MCU fan, a casual fan, or a non-MCU fan? So if you're an MCU fan, I think it's a no-brainer. You may not 100% agree with the ending, but you're going to want to watch this show. It grows a character who's becoming important to the MCU and gives you background on the relationship with Vision while treading some new ground and setting up Phase 4. So as an MCU fan, I kind of think it's pretty much a no-brainer. You want to watch this. Now, casual fans, I think it's going to be a little tougher. This show is disconnected just enough from those big-budget Avenger-style event movies. If you are interested in, if that's the kind of stuff that you're interested in from Marvel, let's say, then I think you're going to have some trouble sticking with this show and caring about these characters, especially with the rough pacing issues that happen at the beginning. However, if you enjoy Marvel storytelling and you stick it out, I think you're going to be rewarded with an entertaining show. Okay, now non-MCU fans, guys, I can't even lie to you. I'm not 100% you even should get into this show. Your preconceived notions and your opinions of prior MCU properties are going to be strong, and you may have a lot of difficulties getting into this thing. In addition, the very, I would say, MCU-esque approach to the storytelling at times, I think it's going to turn you off. However, I think if you were to give it a shot, you would be pulled in by Elizabeth Olsen's very sincere performance, the chemistry that she has with Paul Bettany, the quirky feel of the show, and their desire to at least try to do something in the MCU space. Still, it's a tough sell to the non-MCU fan out there. You have to get past your feelings for the MCU. You got to get past the pacing. And some non-MCU fans are simply not going to be able to do that. And to be honest, I wouldn't blame you if you couldn't. I'm keeping my mid-season rating here of a 7.5 to 8 out of 10. WandaVision, to me, is a highly entertaining, well-produced, well-acted show. If you're a fan of comic book properties, you're a fan of fantasy worlds, and of course, if you're a fan of Marvel characters and their properties, I highly recommend this thing. You should watch it. If you're a fan of deeper science fiction, darker science fiction, you might want to look elsewhere and come back to this show later on after you've consumed some of those other properties and you think you want to give it a shot. But enter it with an open mind before you do. So, I hope you enjoyed the non-spoiler review of WandaVision. Give the show a chance. Tell us what you think out there on Twitter. Tell us what you want to see in the show and what some of your theories were that maybe didn't come true by the time you got to that final episode. I'm hoping to have a full spoiler review in the future for the Film Exiles. Next up in the comic book world, of course, is the Snyder Cut of Justice League. We're all pumped for that. And then after that, we get Falcon and Winter Soldier. From the Exiles family to yours, please stay safe into this, trying to get through this insane pandemic. I'm Christian. You can find me on Twitter and on Instagram at the same place. I'm at Chart6363. You can find the Film Exiles on Twitter and on Vero at the Film Exiles. As always, everyone, stay safe, stay healthy, and above all, stay exiled.